Hi everyone. So I'm in GarageBand at the moment, but this second video for this week is also for both Mac and Windows users, because we're not using any software specific techniques. This is more of a conceptual example about the importance of recurring melody, especially for your third assessment, as well as some strategies for further developing melodic material in your piece. So what I've got open here is just an extension of the example that the previous video finished with. It's a fairly simple project to keep the example straightforward. It's just two layers of looped accompaniment, as well as a MIDI programmed melody that I've written over the top. And to show both recurring melody and developing melodic material, I've organised the project into a binary A-B-A-B structure. So we'll hear the first melody here, an A section, a second but closely related melody in this B section, we'll hear a repeat of the A section, and then we'll finish with the B section again. And I might actually just mark those so we can all see them. So we've got an A section, a B section, a repeat of A, and then we close with another B section, repurposed as an outro. So just before we actually have a listen, I might discuss a little of the significance of recurring melody and why it's important for your third assessment. So if you take any commercial music, so written for albums or for play on the radio or Spotify or something, it's generally a safe bet to say that there'll be a chorus, and that in that chorus there'll be a recurring vocal melody, so that each time the chorus comes back we hear that same melody again. And it's also typically this chorus that gives the song its identity. It's its unique kind of trademark that differentiates it from songs in a similar style or that use similar chords and instruments. So as we've discussed before, melody is typically the focus of the music, but it also becomes its identity. And an important part of this process of giving the song its thematic identity is having a melody that recurs. So whereas you'll only hear an intro or maybe a bridge just once, and then where each verse might be slightly different, part of the reason that the chorus melody often remains consistent is to help cement it in your memory, but also to help establish that you should be considering it as the main theme of the song. Just as we might imagine the main theme from a film score like Star Wars or Harry Potter, which most people would be familiar with. So the melody recurs to let you know that that material is the song's identity, it's its main statement, but at the same time, the reason it's coming back is to give you some consistency, so to give the various different sections of a song a sort of unifying thread to tie it all together. But now on the other hand, to recurring melody, we also have bits of melodic development, so times where we might hear the same melody with alterations or in a different context, or otherwise separate melodic material. And this is also part of that balance, so part of breaking up the main melody or recontextualizing it in an interesting way. And generally the most recognizable example of this is that come the end of a song with multiple choruses, especially a song that builds up over its duration to a big climactic final chorus, you'll typically notice that in that last chorus the vocalist takes extra liberties with the melody and develops it and changes it in interesting ways. So they'll do big extra vocal fills or go to a higher note than they used to show some sort of development or progression over time as if it's a narrative. So while it's difficult to show all of that in just a short example, what this project here has is a main melody in A, which by and large is directly repeated later on. There's some small differences in the surrounding context, such as the drums being a little more built up, but the actual melodic material is identical. So that would be an example of our kind of recurring thematic melody, our main one. What we have in B, however, is a kind of bridging melody, and it's melodic content that's related to A, using similar notes and the same sorts of gestures, but then it doesn't repeat exactly the second time around because we're repurposing its repetition as an outro. You can see that here represented in the preview of the MIDI data, where we have a descending ending on the second repetition, while the first instance ascends to meet the repetition of A. So the B sections are an example of both, of recurring melodic material, but with subtle developments depending on the context. So now I hope all of that's clear. We'll have a listen from the beginning, and then you can decide if it sounds like the things I'm describing. Yeah, so think of that basically as a kind of condensed micro song, where we had a main melody, which repeated, as well as a secondary functional melody that we used as a bit of a bridge and then repurposed as an outro later. Now, one thing I want to cover in a bit more detail is the actual developments of this B melody, and some of the things that you could consider for your own Assessment 3 piece. So for one, the most obvious way to develop new melodic content that's different to the A section is to choose different notes. So while it's still using basically the same stock of notes, it's placing them in a different sequence and at different times. And as we said before, the ending of the melody does also change its actual notes depending on the context. But beyond that, developing the melody is also about recontextualizing it. So again, while the B melodic material is similar to the A melodic material to have some thematic unity, we achieve a different context and feel by changing the chords that are supporting it. So for context, here's the chords for the A melody. And then for the B melody. So immediately we can see that the instrumentation supporting a melody is an important part of the context that helps to develop it. So again on that note, those instrumentation changes can sometimes be enough to change the feel of a melody without actually changing its content. So if I remove this B melody for the moment and actually just replace it with the A melody, we'll already hear a reasonable difference in its execution. So here's the original. So now again with the same melodic content, just over different chords with a slightly different drum beat. So for starters, even something that simple, I'd highly encourage you to experiment with in your third assessment. So say you've written your first melody and you're really happy with how it sounds, try it in the context of different accompaniment to see if it's some sort of interesting development that you can use in your song structure. So I'll just undo all of that for now. And we'll talk about some other more subtle ways to develop the content. So we can change the notes itself, or even not change them and recontextualize them with different instrumentation. But another two useful things to consider if we repurpose a melody to have a structural function is both dynamics and tempo. So we'll hear that compared to in the first B melody, in this mid section. That melody is at its full volume, whereas when we come to the outro later on, you can hear that the dynamic's been reduced a little to help sell the idea that it's a gradual let-down ending. For one, it helps to define the structure, but it's also showing a bit of a development of the melody. And of course the other quite noticeable thing is the decreasing tempo. And that too is playing an important part in both signalling the ending, as well as recontextualizing our melody to hear it in a different developed context. Now beyond this, there are a few other things that you can consider. For one, a common way to develop a melody would be to place it on another instrument. So even just quickly here, if I create another software instrument, let's make it maybe a traditional piano, I could go and take each of these B melodies and then place them instead on a second instrument, so that you have a kind of call and response between two, which is reasonably common in jazz or blues styles, and then you'll get something to this effect. So of course you'll mix the two to blend them a little better, but then you'll have a trading of parts between voices as an interesting way to develop the material. One other suggestion is to actually try to use some audio effects, so maybe bring the melody back with some sort of a delay. But again, we won't dive hugely into audio effects because Acid Express users have limited access, and I'm not making it a requirement for any of these assessments. But yeah, to summarize all of that for your third assessment, what you'll want is melodic material that recurs throughout your song to help set it up as the thematic identity, so the unifying thread throughout the piece which comes back. And you'll also want to balance that with other different melodic material, or by placing the same material in different contexts, so that we have a nice blend of unity and variety. I hope that's all clear enough, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the forum or the chats. And as for any creative exercises this week, it would be good from now to begin working on this third assessment, as it's the larger final work. So it'll be good to give yourself a few weeks to develop it over time into something that you're happy with. Thanks everyone, and I hope you all enjoy.